Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And of course, remember, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's going strong. Well, it's growing. We still got a humble following, but it is definitely growing. But definitely follow us, rate us, review us on our podcast apps. Hey, I don't know if you saw, but we just passed 500,000 downloads, which is pretty cool. So that's definitely headed in the right direction as well. And check out the new Substack. I've been posting stuff there as well. Just trying to find different places for folks to engage and figure out how to talk about politics and religion without killing each other. And I have links in the show notes to make all this stuff easy to find. It helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with Pastor David Hegg. David Hegg is the senior pastor at Grace Baptist Church, and my buddy, Grace Baptist, the one here in Santa Clarita. He has a master's in theology from Western Baptist Seminary and a doctorate in preaching from Westminster Theological Seminary, and also serves as an adjunct professor at Masters. Well, I was going to say Masters College. I guess it's Masters University now. David is also the author of several books, and I'm going to ask him about a couple of them here today. But the Obedience Option, The Well, Appointed to Preach, and the Joni Stories, which is a little different. It goes a little bit far afield, not too far afield, but a little different. But his greatest contribution was certainly his portrayal of the way too tipsy Archdeacon Dobney in Epiphany Collaboration's production of A Woman of No Importance. You remember that one, right, David?
I do, yes. Actually, you roped me into that there, Mr. Director.
I love putting you in compromising positions, but
I understand that. Yeah, it's fine.
So one of I think my affinity was immediately sparked in one of our early conversations. We had met not too long before. I think we went out to lunch. And do you remember our conversation when you first talked to me about getting back involved in ministry at Grace? Do you remember how that went?
No, you know what? Of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most. So enlighten me. Yeah,
Well,
sure, I will remember it because you are very memorable.
okay. So we were talking about that, and I said, Dave, I just got to put it out there. We, that's all well and good, but I'm a guy who likes whiskey, plays a lot of poker, and I don't just cuss, I curse. I'm a Jersey kid who curses. And your response was something along the lines of, oh man, well, you're going to be a royal pain in the ass, aren't you?
Now that I think is probably more your language than mine. But
Okay. All right. Fair
I
enough.
probably said something like that
Yeah.
in a nicer, somewhat more pleasant pastoral vocabulary.
G-rated.
Maybe, especially if there was anybody within earshot that could have heard it and held it
Yeah.
against me.
Well, I do think you crossed the line just enough for me to say, okay, we're going to get along just fine.
Yeah, we like this guy. Okay, I see where you're coming from.
That's
Well,
right.
I've never stopped liking and actually loving you and your beautiful wife. Just a lot of things that you're involved in, I really appreciate.
All right. Well, I'm going to test that love today.
Yeah, I know.
Well, in all seriousness, one of the things that we haven't done, and I'd love to hear more about, is to hear your faith journey. I know you grew up. Your dad was a pastor, right? Or
That's true. Yeah. In
yeah.
fact, I'm in the process of writing a book called The Vigilant Pastor because I see too many guys falling. I mean, every time I open my Flipboard or any of my curated news things, I see some pastor who has been indicted or had to, step down because of inappropriate sexual or business practices. And so anyway, I'm writing a book based on Second Timothy, Paul's call to Timothy to be careful, to guard what God has given him. And I think there's a lot of guys who aren't vigilant. But I was thinking about it. I asked myself the question, how did I get into pastoral ministry? And really, I've been in it my whole life. By that, I mean, I was born into a pastor's family. And my dad had a doctorate from Dallas Theological Seminary. He was an Old Testament, New Testament scholar, theologian, had a really nice Baptist church. And he was a great dad. He went to all my games, and I had a great relationship with him. And so I was the guy who mowed the church lawn. I turned off all the lights after services. So I grew up in pastoral ministry without even knowing it. And quite frankly, the only thing I knew I didn't want to be was a pastor. And then I
Oh,
got to college. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'd seen what my dad went through. You
yeah.
know, calls at 4 in the morning because somebody got in an accident or some husband came home drunk or whatever. So, and I just thought, I just want to make money. I don't want, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I went away to college and over college time, I learned that I like to study the Bible and I like to talk to people about it. And so I ended up going to seminary. But out of seminary, ran into a buzzsaw. Uh, and I got kicked out of seminary, quite frankly, which is its own story. Not because of something I did, but because we started a church that wasn't to the liking of the president. He wanted to say there's only one way to govern a New Testament church, and that is one pastor and deacons. And we started a church with a plurality of elders, a
Mm,
plurality of leadership, of which the senior pastor was just one. So they didn't accept the the work that I did as a student. You had to gain so many credits, teaching a Sunday school class, visitation, interviewing the pastor, that kind of stuff when you're in seminary to go into the second year. And I earned 11 of them, but they wouldn't count them. And the board voted 11 to 1 not to accept them because of the church that we had started. And the interesting thing is, the one was my dad.
oh,
He
wow.
voted for me, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I didn't have anything. I had to sit out for 4 months, and then we went down to Portland, and I finished seminary at Western, and as you mentioned, and then I just had a chip on my shoulder. So I said, I'm going to go back. We graduated. I went back to the church, put myself under the elders there, and said, look, I don't think a man has a right to say, I'm called to preach. I'm going to go be a pastor. The Bible's clear in First Timothy that the presbytery or the session had to lay their hands on Timothy and grant him that they affirmed that the call that he had on God from God was exhibited through his giftedness.
Mm,
So I stayed. I told the guys, look, I'll do whatever. And so, you know what? I got a job at a print shop. And then I was in the corporate world for 4 years. And then I had my own small business selling chocolate, which I made a ton of money. So for 10 years, I was a working guy. And I
mm.
owned a company. I was a sales manager in 5 states eventually. And until 10 years after graduating seminary, a little church out in Illinois asked me if I wanted to come and do there what I was doing on the college campus up in at Pacific Lutheran University. I was we were I was the college football chaplain basically, and my wife and I had 150 students that were in Bible studies, counting the guys and their girlfriends and all kinds of other people, and that was a beautiful time of life. I wasn't getting paid to do it. I was making money selling chocolate and spending time with college kids, and it was great. But this little church asked me to come out to Illinois. We came out there. So that was the first time I was paid to be a pastor. I left there to come to a little church in Corona, California. I was there 16 years, and now we're in a large church. So my point being, I went from being a baby in a pastor's family and setting up chairs and turning off lights to being just a person going in trying to help a group start a church, then being a volunteer, then being a volunteer leader, then being a associate pastor, then being a senior pastor of a small church, now a senior pastor of a large church, teach at the university. So, I mean, I don't, it just happened.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never sent a resume.
Now, you
Yes,
brought
I
up
was. They'd come after me. So,
that's
yeah.
that's good. You're wanted. You're recruited, man.
Well, the Lord is my agent, okay? So that's how I look at it.
There, there's not much what do you call it? Contractual negotiations there.
That's right. That's right.
So I have a couple questions. A
Sure.
couple things that you said. One is it's maybe more of a technical question. So there was a point at I guess in your whether it was your undergrad or your master's when there was a categorical line that was crossed. Um, and first of all, I'm curious for you to go a little bit deeper into what that is. Something about the multitude of pastors versus deacons.
Church governance,
Yeah. But here's the thing. This the you're a professor, an adjunct prof at Masters, right? And
Yes.
they've been known to take pretty categorical lines as well. For example, I have a friend um, who got to the point of finishing his dissertation and the very end of his doctoral work there, or maybe it was one of his master's degrees. And one of the conclusions that he arrived at was that he just couldn't affirm the young Earth creationist position that I know Johnny Mack and Masters holds. So now, in more of a position of leadership, what is your response when you see an organization that you're involved with taking a similar type of categorical stance like that?
Well, I mean, it depends on what the category is. Uh,
Right. So in
you know,
Samir's case, like I said, it
24
was the
hour,
young
24
Earth
hour
versus old Earth
creation.
creation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 24-hour days, 6-day creation. I preached through Genesis, and when I was preaching, and I taught Old Testament survey at the Masters University.
Hmm.
And what I said was, the thing that is near to my heart is that you preach the Bible the way it was written. And I can guarantee you that when Moses was writing Genesis 1 and 2, there's no way he was trying to use it to combat evolution. There's no way. He was speaking to a whole different set of sociological issues that were going on with the children of Israel who were wandering around in the wilderness. And so we can't necessarily say, hey, unless you, and I know there are some categories who believe that. Here's what I believe about creation, that God created immediately and that Adam was a unique creation. Those are the two things that I get out of Genesis. Now, when I say immediately, if you want to take that as it happened in a second or over 24 hours of a day or whatever, there's a lot that can be said from Genesis about creation.
Well,
However, I
yeah.
know guys who don't believe in the doctrine of election, for instance, and they can be my friends. Some of the greatest theologians on my shelf are what we call amillennial, and I'm premillennial. Certain things never made it into the creeds, the Westminster Creed, the Heidelberg Catechism, the 1689 Baptist Confession, all of these the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed.
Right.
You get right down to the guts and the center of Christianity, those other things have come in because people want to make sure that uh, that unity is based on their views.
Right.
Unity is actually based on what the Bible absolutely teaches, and there are secondary and tertiary issues.
Right.
Now, we wouldn't have someone on staff who didn't believe the two things that I mentioned, that God created with a word and that Adam was a unique creation. Now that leaves a lot of leeway. Okay. Now, with regard to your friend, um, I don't know what if there is something that you have to agree to become admitted to the master's university or the master's seminary in terms of the 24-hour day, uh, all those kinds of. I don't know, but if an institution, for instance, let's say the Corey Nathan Academy of what's happening now.
Yeah.
And you have some entrance requirements. You say, number one, you have to have a white beard. So I qualify, and so do you.
All
So
right.
if someone comes and says, okay, I'm going to wear a white beard, he gets entrance into your academy. And in the middle of whatever he's doing, he decides, I don't like that. I'm going to shave my beard. I don't. Well, that's not your fault. If someone comes in knowing what's required, and then changes in the middle, that's their deal. So I tell people we have fellowship here in this town with I even have personal fellowship with Roman Catholics. Okay. Monsignor Mike at St. Kateri and I were good friends. He's now gone. He's dead.
Hmm.
Hopefully he's with Jesus. I don't have evidence to say he isn't. So, but we also liked each other enough to say we have different views on things like how the church is to be run. What do we think of history? What do we think of the Apocrypha? What do we think of the sacraments? We had differences. We didn't let the differences keep us from appreciating what we had in common, which
So
is what your podcast is all about.
yeah. So let me frame it this way. I would imagine then in this particular situation that if you were in the room, that you would, like we've talked about this before, that if you were in the room when a final decision was being made about this one student, which I'm gathering that this isn't just an isolated incident, that you would share some of that same wisdom, your own beliefs, but at the same time talking about, hey, is this a primary issue or secondary, tertiary issue? You probably say that the 24-hour thing is a secondary, if not a tertiary issue. You might push back. Maybe I'm just wish casting here, but you might push back and say, hey, let's pump the brakes here for a second before we take this young man who spent the 2 or 3 years or whatever it was to get his master's and just dismiss him out of hand. Let's really think this through. You might be the guy that's pumping the brakes in that room. Is that fair to say?
Well, again, it depends on what the entrance requirements were. If
Right.
there's a doctrinal statement that said,
Okay. That makes
to
sense.
enter our seminary, and I'm pretty sure it was seminary because we don't have a thesis like that at the university. So if I enter the seminary and the seminary says these are our doctrinal and social beliefs, okay, that to get into a degree program, and you say yes, I believe those, and then at some point you say you don't
Hmm.
believe them, then whether it's Harvard or the Washington State University or wherever, they have a right to be able to say, no, you came in under this, and this is what our guidelines are
Yeah.
for graduation. Now, I don't know the situation.
Yeah. I'm just using it as an example. So I'm not
Now,
holding you to it. I'm,
let's
as an
say that
illustration.
wasn't in any entrance requirements.
Right.
Let's there was nothing about 24-hour creation or whatever. And you had a student who's now written his dissertation and he's doing his doctorate or his master's or whatever, and I'm on the panel and and we're bringing this up and we're saying, we on the panel who were examining you, we have a different view of this.
Hmm.
I would make sure that he could defend it biblically, that he
Okay.
could defend it correctly. If he could, there's nothing that would prohibit me if there were no entrance requirements. If it's not something we said was primary, then we would make him defend it just like you would if you were at Harvard getting a degree in literature and somebody asked you, what do you think of the Romantic poets? And you came up with a view of them that I disagreed with. I just make you support it, but I wouldn't knock you out of the running if just because of disagreement.
So that's encouraging because the first of all, I want to go back for a second, but I'm going to finish this point and affirm something that you said. One of the issues that I've run up against in having conversations about Genesis 1 and 2, is that I know my people. So even if we imagine, the Jewish people, the Israelites, at the foot of Mount Sinai, hearing the word of God Himself. I just can't imagine that any of my people would say, when they heard the word day, say, you think he really means a 24-hour day? So it's just, but the bigger issue, that's kind of a silly way to put it, but the bigger issue is that I think some of our friends end up making an idol in a way out of science or evolution, or maybe not an idol, but another authority by which scripture should be measured. And you and I believe that scripture is the ultimate authority, or is,
Right.
the word of God,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So by placing this other thing as some other authority by which the Bible should be measured, we're kind of getting it backwards. What you said about when Moses was transcribing these words, he was not there. Nobody was combating the idea of evolution. So I just wanted to affirm that's a nuanced way to think of that moment, and I know that's a big part of what you know. I was just you were preaching it also, and then you said this a number of times in different ways. The greatest need in the church today is for pastors to preach the Bible the way it was written. That is to
Absolutely.
recognize the big
Absolutely.
beginning place of meaning is determining what the original author intended the original
Yes.
readers to
Yes.
understand from the words he used.
And that's the problem with trying to make Genesis 1 and 2 just about rebutting evolution.
Mm.
I think evolution micro is true, macro is not. And there are other ways to go about that. You can do that scientifically.
Right. So
Thomas Nagel, well, go ahead.
So getting so the but what I was driving at, it, the idea of honest inquiry. You and I have talked about N.T. Wright, Tom Wright's work, and in his big books, one of the reasons that I appreciate the way he went about it, the way he went about what produced the five larger volumes, especially the two on Paul, but certainly those first three. I mean, they were life changing, like spirit life changing for me, because what I recognized that that Christian scholar did, is he went into an inquiry with the possibility that certain pillars of his faith will be shaken. He was going about doing academic history work, knowing that he's risking the possibility that he'll come to conclusions that will completely shake his faith. And he arrived at, I think he has deeper roots to his faith, and certainly certainly the third volume on the resurrection, as well as the second volume on Jesus and the victory of God. It helped me deepen and affirm my faith. But I get the sense that the process of inquiry is sometimes different. You students at an institution like Masters can go into a process of inquiry as long as they arrive at the right answer. So that's my impression, but I'm getting the feeling from what you said before that maybe that's not a fair assessment.
No, I don't think it is a fair assessment. Again, it has to do with what you enter with. If you say I'm in agreement with the doctrinal position, let me use Grace Baptist Church as an example. We have a statement of faith that you have to agree to, that you believe it, you agree to it, uh, even if you don't understand it all the way. Maybe you don't have a doctorate degree in theology, but you understand what it's being said and you agree to it, you can be a member. But we have an additional set of things that are our distinctives at Grace Baptist Church. For instance, the idea of eschatology, the last things. There are a number of positions. And so to be a member of our church, you don't have to hold a particular position. But to be a teacher, someone who holds a position that represents our theological values, you
Yeah.
have to be premillennial. Now, within premillennialism, you can be dispensational, you can be classic premillennial, you can be progressive premillennial, or you can be historic premillennial. So even there is place
So
for interact.
just for our listeners, what is first of all, I love any conversation that allows for the word eschatology, eschatological, one of my favorite words. But for most of our listeners, I don't think would know what premillennial is. So just for the
Oh,
average person out
okay.
there.
So in Romans 20 or Revelation 20, it speaks about 1,000 year period. And the millennials say that's just metaphorical, it's just symbolic, it's not real. We're in it now.
Hmm.
During the millennium, according to Revelation 20, Satan is bound and God has having his way. So the amillennialists say he's bound now somehow, wow, and that there really is no such thing as this 1,000 year reign. The premillennialists would say that Jesus' return to the earth comes before this 1,000 years, the word millennium in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 5. Some say post, no. So Christian nationalists would be more post millennial, and they say the church actually brings in the kingdom. So that's why, in the political sense, real Christian nationalists are those who believe that Christians should hold offices, that we should have the militia, that we are actually going to bring in the kingdom. Sometimes it's through the gospel. The radical ones think it's through revolution. So that's why okay, so there's premillennial, there's postmillennial, and amillennial. Amillennials don't believe in it at all. And
Okay.
then, of course, there's guys like you who are panmillennial who say, I don't know what it means, but it'll all pan out in the end. That's a little theological humor.
All right.
So, my point is to be a teacher here, to be on our staff teaching or a volunteer teaching Bible studies, you have to subscribe to a little more finer statement of belief,
Okay.
including not just doctrinal positions, but social values.
I want to go back to something else you said earlier about pastors. Now, I think you're right. I think there are a number, and you're. Is it a new book or one of the books that's just coming out about equipping pastors?
Yeah, it's in the course of being written right now.
Okay.
Vigilant pastor.
So one of the other things that we know, there are so many pastors that are feeling dejected, just downright tired, uh, exhausted over especially the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Have you been experiencing that at Grace? Because what's happening in our culture, man, it's you, you had this whole series about walking the ridgeline, right? But a
Yes.
lot a lot of pastors feel like they're walking on the razor's edge, and they haven't been able to balance it well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the latest Gallup poll, the Barna poll, all these, the latest thing that's come out about pastors is that 80% of the pastors that they surveyed feel fatigued,
Yeah,
feel like that what they're doing is not having the effect they'd like to have. And they actually feel, as a result, they feel underprepared. And part of that is that when you go to seminary and learn to be a pastor, you learn the Bible, hopefully, you learn some theology. And most guys don't learn self-discipline. They don't learn how do I schedule, how do I delegate, how do I lead. Leadership is not a big deal. It's becoming a big deal because uh, the church is both a business and a ministry.
yeah.
And you've got to hire and fire, and you have to have protocols, and you've got a budget, and you've got a plan, and you've got to have, objectives and measurement. So some of us that were in the corporate world, we brought that with us. A lot of guys have not. So I haven't experienced that. I love what I do, but the key is I have a team of guys that I work with, and I have hired guys that are better at certain things than I am, and I give them their lane, and we measure each other. But I love what I do.
Yeah.
Now, I'm approaching 70, having been doing this for 35, almost 40 years. It does get fatiguing. It's kind of like Seinfeld when Newman was talking about the mail. It just keeps coming and coming. Well, guess what? No matter what happens, Sunday happens. And so there's a Monday coming up, Memorial Day. We get it off. Well, yeah, I still have to get done on Monday what I always get done on Monday. The other thing is that we're finding, I think, and I think there are a lot of studies to back this up, that what died at COVID is trust. Out of COVID, we don't trust. We don't trust science. We don't, or the government. We don't trust medicine. We're getting to the place we are longing for something we can trust, and this is a good thing because we believe that the Bible, being the Word of God, is trustworthy. That God's promises are trustworthy, and even though we can't explain everything, we're finding that having something outside of ourselves that we can lash onto, that we can anchor to is very, very good for the human psyche. So the church is, we should be in a good place.
So I want to ask you some tough questions, and we can punt on this if it's not something that you care to engage about. But I'm curious. You talk about COVID, and I think you're right. I think a lot of folks maybe were leaning one way or the other, but weren't terribly engaged. But there were certain things that happened through COVID that just downright radicalized some folks.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely a time when a lot of our, friends who are in leadership, pastors, just the exhaustion, the fatigue, the spiritual fatigue just got so much more exacerbated because of what they were handling within their church. So I'm curious how prevalent, say, something like Christian nationalism or some of these other radical strains of political and social thought have been at a church like Grace.
Well, I think we've done a really good job of keeping our level heads. We did have some benefits. We have an outdoor theater, sometimes called an amphitheater, but it's really a theater. Um, and we were able to meet and we were able to stay within the guidelines of the government, which was something we decided that we wanted to do. Not so much because we don't think church is essential, we do, but because we wanted to be a good testimony to our community. And so several of the churches got together. We ran a full page ad in the paper and said, this is what we're going to do, 17 of us. So it was really a show of unity within Santa Clarita. But we were able to continue meeting outside. Nobody ever came up on our campus and said, you can't do this and you can't do that. We did let people work from home because at the time we didn't know. We didn't know if this was going to kill us all or if it was nothing or if it was somewhere in between. I had it twice. I took
Oh,
all the vaccines.
yeah.
I did what I thought I should do. And this is a time of, we left room for conscience. But I will tell you that there are many believers for whom COVID was kind of the last straw with regard to government policies. And I think you're seeing it now. Every time you open the newspaper or go online, which is what I do, you realize that there's upheaval going on in our day, in our world, uh, in our state, and everybody has an opinion. And we're at Grace, we are solidly in line with the biblical worldview. Titus says we are to be submissive to the governing authorities. Okay, it just says that. And we're to be gentle and we're to be courteous to all people, Titus 3, 1 and 2. So what I'm telling our people is whatever you believe, you still got to lead with your life. I want us to be the people when we walk in the room, when David Hegg walks in the room, Corey Nathan goes, okay, I'm glad David's here. All right, we're going to, we may disagree on some things, but we can't disagree with one another as brothers in Christ, as fellow human beings, as fellow thinkers. And this is, in some ways, I am doing in our church what you're trying to do with this podcast, talking about religion and politics without killing each other.
Yeah, yeah. Now, to put a finer point on it, I think I shared a story with you from it must have been 2000. Yeah, it was 2004. Pastor Tom was still the main teacher at Grace, and there was a Carrie Edwards bumper sticker on one of the cars in the parking lot. And I joked around with Pastor Tom about it. And even at that time, this is 20 plus years ago now, he said, Corey, you're joking with me, but he said, I've already received a dozen emails. Pastor Tom, what are we going to do about this? So, but to ask a more serious question, is a church like Grace, can it be, is it, I guess it would be hospitable for everyone, but it would someone who espouses Christian nationalist views feel more, would it be more hospitable to someone like that versus somebody who, say, had a Kamala Harris bumper sticker on their car in the last election?
I would hope that we welcome everyone. It doesn't mean we agree with them. It doesn't mean we applaud them.
Okay.
We don't and I would speak more about virtue and righteousness rather than political theory or political choices. I mean, if somebody dropped, drove up with I don't know, a Harris Waltz sticker on their car,
Yeah.
nobody's going to do anything here. I mean, they may disagree with them, but they're not going to treat them poorly. I'm not going to get any. I'm not getting any emails. We had some of that. We have a couple of trucks that show up and have bumper stickers, about stuff. And now, I think if it was somebody suggesting that we fly a Palestinian flag and a Hamas flag, next to our American flag, we'd probably say no to that. I know we would. Um, we have a view of Israel here that, they're an apostate nation, but we also believe that we should, uh,
What
give
do you
them
mean by
their,
apostate nation?
well, so is America.
Okay.
There's
S-
no such thing as a Christian nation. There's no
Right.
such
Okay.
thing as a nation that is in and of itself God's people. God's
Okay.
people are now known as those who follow Christ.
Okay. So you're okay. I was just asking for clarification. So you do make a distinction that America is not a Christian nation per se. It's not, you
Yeah,
know,
and it never was.
right. Right.
Making me say that it's a democratic republic. There's some really, really good things about it. As I think it was George Washington, it's a republic if you can keep it.
There's Ben Franklin. Yeah. Yeah.
Ben Franklin, okay, same era.
Yeah.
So the idea is, Yeah, I mean, nothing that is run by humanity is ever going to be without problems because humanity is given towards pride and greed and all those things. You and I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So, what we're trying to do at Grace Baptist is we're trying to talk about righteousness and virtue and values. So, we're very strong about sanctity of human life. We're very strong about marriage being one man, one woman, one flesh, one lifetime. Now, we have people who come right now. We have people in our church who are not married and pregnant. So what we try and do is meet them where they are and take them where they need to be. If they don't want to go the direction they that they need to be, uh, at some point they're just going to say, "Look, we don't agree with you here. We're not comfortable here." And that's if they find that they're not comfortable because of what we believe, that's fine. If it's because of the way we treat them, that's bad.
Okay. That makes sense. I was going to ask you about that. Would somebody who's gay, for example, feel at home at a church like Grace? And what you're
Probably.
saying is that you're gonna preach what and teach and lead and model what you believe based on biblical principles,
Yeah.
um, and uh, and you're gonna treat someone and love on someone, but you're not going to back away from those scriptural values.
No, and even more than that, we're not going to throw darts at them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where my understanding is that someone who goes against what God has designed ultimately is not on the path to joy and satisfaction and peace. In the same way, and don't make too much out of this example, but if someone is doing something physically to their body that is not, we know, not going to help them, we're not going to be mad at them for doing that. We're going to try and show them, look, there's a better way to live. That's really what following Christ is. It's denying self, which means all the things I'm trying to do to make my life work is not gonna work as long as I continue, not agreeing that Jesus is God the Son and that He alone is the Savior and that His death has wiped out my debt and that the Spirit gives me the opportunity to see that, see my sin, turn from it, and run to Christ. So we first have to deny ourselves. And there's all kinds of ways that people are trying from outside themselves to make life meaningful. And I just believe it'll never work without Christ.
What is the process? Is it possible that, say, take a cultural hot button issue? I know you're very thoughtful, and you arrive at conclusions. You start with scripture and end with scripture, right? And it's done among other wise counsel. But how can you arrive at the conclusion that maybe uh, your first your first attempt at arriving at a conclusion was wrong? Is that possible? Or do you arrive at a conclusion and just kind of stick to it?
It's really interesting. I teach a class on how to study the Bible. And stay with me here. One of the problems is that we all have a basis of thought. We have a framework. Okay, and I draw a picture on the board of this, and it says framework, and that the framework actually holds the text. So you can't come to any text, whether it's Mark Twain or the Book of Luke, without some already built-in bias, and you hold it, and you pour your framework into the text, and that's what a lot of people do. They come to the Bible with their framework. Now, here's what you have to do. The uh, the mantra of the Reformation was semper refer ecclesia reformata semper reformanda. The church reformed and always reforming, and everyone forgets that last part.
Mm,
What has to happen if I'm pouring my framework into the text? Then when I run into something that doesn't fit with my framework, that means I have to bring it back and I have to redo my framework. You see that cycle that I bring my thought. For instance, when I was a young pastor, it was about time to do the Lord's Supper. And so I started writing my notes and I said, as my dad always said, this is the bread, this is my body, which is broken for you. And I thought, I got to find that scripture that says it was broken for you. Guess what? It isn't in the Bible
mm.
because his body was never broken. It says the prophecy, not a bones of his will be broken. It says, this is my body, which is for you. So what did I have to do? I had to go back and change my framework. And when I went to Corona, the first church I ever pastored as a senior pastor, they were all, oh, let's have a Saturday night service. And I said, you can't have a Saturday night service. Sunday's the Lord's Day. It's how I'd been raised. Guess what? There's nothing in the Bible that says you can't have a Saturday service or a Tuesday service or any service. Or here's no, we had a men's breakfast the other day and they asked me to pray for the food. And out of the blue, I just said, you know what, guys? There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to thank the Lord for the food. The reason we do it is because when Jesus was going to multiply the molecules of the bread and the fish, he stopped and he blessed it. So out of that comes this law that, and I was raised, oh, you gotta pray for the food. And if you're in a restaurant and you see some other believer not pray for the food, you go, oh my goodness, what's wrong with that? I have an allergy to legalism, and legalism is when you take things that aren't biblically must-haves and make them a must-have. So I get back to my little picture about we pour our framework into the text, but we have to then see the text, say, wait a minute, my framework is wrong. You got to readjust your framework. And this is the cycle of theology. And this is the cycle when you teach the Bible and study the Bible the way it was written. I mean, I'm going through Matthew right now, and we're just getting beat up. Jesus said, blessed are the merciful.
Mm,
Blessed
right.
are the poor in spirit. And you look around and there's all these pastors and leaders and Christian musicians who are anything but pure in spirit and merciful and humble. And Jesus said, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and give my life a ransom for many. Many of these guys who are falling in adultery, you find out from the people who are around them that they're arrogant. They demand first class seats on planes when you bring them in. They have to eat at Ruth's Chris. They have a rider that's as long as your arm. And you're going, wait a minute, what happened to you didn't come to be served, but to serve? So I am one of those guys who really am trying daily to restructure my framework, my bias, to bring it more and more in line with what God's word really says.
Well, to your point, last time we got together, it was at California Pizza Kitchen and not Larson's. But
Yeah.
maybe we'll have to hit up Larson's at some point just to see if I could shake up your framework there and eat at a first class joint.
Yeah, we can go for happy hour. It's cheaper. I've done that quite a bit.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, okay. So a serious question though, and you knew I had to ask you about this, but at the beginning of your series, Walking the Ridgeline, really appreciated that framework, if you will, or that theme.
Yep.
It was a great way to address some really hard, to enter into a hard conversation and address themes from a scriptural perspective. One of the things you said was, if being involved in politics demands that I compromise my biblical worldview, then I must withdraw. And I immediately thought, would that be altogether, or could that mean leaving, say, one line on your ballot blank? And
That's exactly what it meant.
okay,
I didn't vote for president in the last few elections.
okay,
The Ridgeline, if you listen to it all the way, you know that when it comes to culture, on the one hand, you have some Christians, many who have withdrawn from culture. Okay, they may vote, but they don't want anything to do with it. They just, they think culture's bad. They may go to a movie, but they're always picking on them and whatever. On the other hand, you have some who are at war with culture, some Christians. Everything's bad. They're out, picketing or whatever, saying stuff. So the third W is we are to witness to it. It's what Jesus said in Matthew 5, you're salt. And salt has to have contact to have any effect, but it can't lose its saltiness. So I call it contact without compromise. So
mm,
for instance, if I were to get elected to or to run for some elected office and I had to compromise my biblical worldview to win, I wouldn't run. If to serve on a committee, I have to do something that would compromise my biblical worldview, I wouldn't do on the committee. It doesn't mean I wouldn't try and get someone on the committee. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't care about what the committee was doing. Like right now, the planning council here in our town and how
yeah,
they're They're trying to think about what's happening on Main Street and what's happening in Plaza Rita Canyon. I have very good opinions about those things, and I will make them known, but I'm not going to do it in a way that would any way compromise the fact that I'm first and foremost a Christ follower.
Mm. So how do you have that conversation with folks that you're charged with leading? Just to get real specific with it, I have a hard time reckoning with brothers and sisters I've been in Bible study with, um, who found reason to vote for someone like Donald Trump. I mean, I you know me, I read the Bible every day, and this morning I was in Psalms 10. It doesn't even, not even Psalms 10. It's almost every page of the Bible just testifies against the words and actions of someone like Donald Trump. So I can't, when you talk about virtue, I can't get there. And I don't judge folks who did find a reason to vote for him, but when it's someone I love, someone I'm charged with leading, um, how do you have those conversations?
Well, I'm not leading them who they should vote for. I mean,
Okay. So you're speaking more from a
that's a
principle standpoint.
yeah, that's a personal thing. It's a conscience thing.
Okay.
Frankly, I know a guy I used to know him, Steve Largent.
Yeah,
Didn't
yeah.
know me, but he was a Christian. He was a true believer. And when we were up in Seattle, we had friends who knew him, and we'd heard him speak and that kind of thing. And when he retired from the NFL, he went to Oklahoma and got elected as a congressman for at least 2 terms. And then after that, he resigned. And he said, quite frankly, at the national level, almost at every level, politics is about compromise.
Yeah.
You help one guy get his thing done, so he'll vote to yours. And he says, I just couldn't do it. Okay? And I think that's a very real position to have. What I would say is that too many Christians see the economy as the golden calf. And if we can put more money in our
Mm,
pocket because of somebody, and we have issues, right? The border and law and order and safety and all those kinds of things.
yeah.
But when you go into the voting booth, the reason it's closed is because it's a time of conscience. And there are some, I leave room for wisdom. If somebody, uh, I didn't vote for Trump the first 2 times because I didn't vote for president. I just left it blank. And I think that that is a viable option. But I think it's also, if I wanted to vote for Trump the third time, that's a matter of my conscience between the Lord and I. Now, the difference is if I'm out there beating the drum and giving money and saying this guy's the best guy and he's probably a second coming of Jesus, those are the people that I would go to in our church. I don't know anybody like that in our church. Uh, I think everybody who voted, however they voted, I think we all hold our nose and vote. I don't
Yeah.
know if there's anybody that I would really, really want to be in probably has a worldview that they couldn't get anything done because they wouldn't compromise. I mean, I look at Mike Johnson, Bob Thune, or John.
John Thune from,
I
yeah.
know his brother Bob, who's a evangelical free church pastor, and they're good men, and I'm glad they're in positions, but I got to tell you, I couldn't do what they do because it's all about shaving the edges off my biblical worldview in order to get some good things done. You have to hold your nose and turn your back on some other stuff. That's the way that politics is now,
Yeah. Now
and that's sad.
I think there are plenty of people who are in public service that are good people, but they're people. They're not Jesus, so we have to remember that.
Totally.
But there's a line somewhere. And someone like Suzette Valdez, who I strongly supported, Republican in the state Senate now, serves our district in the state Senate.
Yeah, she
Um,
voted, but she did something towards abortion. I personally talked to her about that. She was in a caucus and she needed to, I mean, it was going to pass anyway, and she needed to curry favor with the people in her caucus. Problem is, it probably cost her the election.
oh, the
So,
the second is rerunning when she
yeah,
was running for reelection in the assembly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and so these are political things, right? And this is where I like Suzette as well.
Yeah.
And I've been on her pastoral advisory board and those kinds of things. It's just difficult, okay? Especially when you're in a state called California that the conservative side has very little voice. If you want to have any voice anywhere, you've got to compromise. And you know, I couldn't do it personally. I'm not saying I'm glad someone's doing it, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Again, I always appreciate the the nuanced views that you're able to hold while holding on to pretty firm primary principles. So I really do appreciate that. So let me ask you, as we start to wind it down, the TP&R question, and that is, what do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So that's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Well, yeah, we should never kill each other. Okay. I do think what we have to do is we have to shave the edges off our rhetoric. So instead of me saying, "Oh, Corey Nathan, you're an idiot. You don't think. Come on, you got to understand that such and such is a horrible person, and you kind of like him. I can't believe you. I could never, that kind of stuff. That we have to shave the edges off of any rhetoric that would keep us from getting to know one another in a relational way. That would then be a foundation for us to understand at least why someone thinks the way they do. Okay, we actually all have an ideology, whether it's you want to call it a worldview or a political foundation or whatever. And I will tell you, one of the best things we could do is have multiple outlets for what we think news is. Okay, I mean,
What are some of the outlets that you would
I
uh,
use the World News Group, WNG. Uh, uh, I like the Wall Street Journal. Okay, I have a curated thing called Flipboard where I have the Christian Post, I have Fox, I have CNN, I have all these. And it is rather amazing when you look at different groups that have a different ideology, how the same event is seen from two different corners. It's like a car crash,
yeah.
and one guy says they were blue cars and one guy says they're red. And this is what has caused America to erode its trust in the normal news areas.
Yeah.
That's why places like Newsmax and other places and podcasts. I mean, podcasts now are where most of us are getting what we think is the best news outlet.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are that's a good point, but there are some resources that are emerging and outlets that are emerging. Tangle News, for example, readtangle.com. Their approach is to tackle one big story a day, and they curate three the way three treatments of it from left leaning organizations, and then three right leaning uh, uh, platforms, and then they give their own commentary. But they start with what another friend of mine called period news. Right? They
Yeah.
start with just the facts, and they're very careful about, to your point, even the way they word that first summary, that first news summary, because the words that you choose can really slant a story one way or the other. So that's a good resource. Ground News is more of a curator, where there's a news story, and then they'll share the treatment of that story from any number of organizations, literally sometimes dozens of outlets, and they classify them as right leaning, centrist, or left leaning. So that's a really good resource, and a lot of those are. There's still plenty of local news sources. So I found outlets like resources like Ground News and outlets like Tangle to be really helpful in that regard to help me think through any important news of the day. Um, I do want to ask you before you get to turn the tables on me. I do want to ask you. So you got some books coming out. Tell us a little bit more about what
Yeah.
you're more prolific. I don't know how you find the time in the day as the old man that you are, that you say you are. So tell me about your upcoming
Well,
books.
yeah, I think the obedience option's been out. It's based on the idea that what God has for us is always best for us. And then the well is I've written a page of commentary and a prayer on every chapter in the Bible. And so it's a reader's companion. It's not a full commentary, but as you're reading the Bible, 2, 3 chapters a day, it gives you a sense of the history and what God is trying to say. The Refuge Marriage book is from the book of Ruth, which is the story of Boaz and Ruth in their marriage. And in chapter 2, verse 12, when Ruth asks Boaz, "Why are you being so nice to me?" He says, "Because it's been told to me about how you left your people and you've come to find refuge under the wings of the Almighty." Well, that refuge that God gives us is actually supposed to be seen in the refuge we provide for our spouses in our marriage. So it's a book on marriage, talks about acceptance, affection, provision, and protection. So it's a different kind of marriage book, and I think it's doing well, and it's available on Amazon. And then Joni Stories, you mentioned, that's the little house on the prairie with a biblical worldview. It's a lot of adventures for kids between 7 and 13 who love horses. And then, yeah,
That's
I
great,
also
man.
have a novel coming out, believe it or not. It's called Calvin's Cross. It's like the librarian, uh, he's looking, trying to, it's a scavenger hunt throughout Europe. And it also brings out a little bit about John Calvin and what he was about. And at the bottom line, I wrote it because when Dan Brown wrote about, the Da Vinci Code,
Yeah.
he used he used a novel to teach what he thought was historical truth, and I thought that's not fair.
Mm.
They had that Da Vinci Code peer reviewed, they would have ripped it apart as not historical. So I said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. The whole thing is about the problem of evil. How do
Okay.
we understand the problem of evil? And I wrapped it into a large novel that goes through three different eras of time. And anyway, I think it's pretty good. And that'll be out probably by the end of the year.
So
And
I
and we just wrote a commentary on Matthew from a Jewish point of view. It's
wait a
called,
second. Hold on.
yep,
From a
yep.
Jewish point of view, that's
Well,
crazy.
bringing out the Jewishness of Matthew.
Did you have some Jews helping you out in this matter?
Well, according to my grandfather, we're Jewish. My
Okay.
brother's a Messianic rabbi. He is.
You're what?
My brother
Oh, your
is
brother's a
a
Messianic rabbi.
Messianic rabbi.
All right.
Yeah.
So this might be for our next get together,
Okay.
our next episode of TPNR. But I might have some issues with that. And might I remind you that I was kicked out of the what do you call it? The Easter, the Passion Play, for being too much of a rabble rouser. But that's a whole other conversation, isn't
That
it?
has nothing to do with your ethnicity, my friend.
I know. But I was being a
You love rousing Rabel, or rabeling Rousey.
All right. So now's maybe not the best time for me to ask this, but do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. What's your solution to talking about religion and politics without killing each other?
I don't have just one. We're 280 something episodes into this program. Uh, so maybe that's a book that needs to be written. And there's been a lot of great pieces of advice. But since you're here, what comes to mind is the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I
Absolutely.
think if we can start there, even my non-Christian or even non-religious friends can appreciate the merits of that principle, to see the humanity, the full humanity. And I love the way the first part of that is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, because he's addressing the multi-dimensional reality of who we are as unique creatures, heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if we can see that in our neighbors, and our neighbors is you, our neighbor is my next door neighbor. Our neighbor is the guy that I see on a walk. Our neighbor is the guy with the truck that has the big sticker on the back with Joe Biden, all tied up. He's my neighbor too, So to see the human, or to see my neighbor in someone who uses they, them, to see the humanity in them, start there, as opposed to putting that person in a box. Oh, they use they, them, or he's wearing that, Trump 47 hat, whatever it might be, to see the humanity in them first. And then we can start to have a conversation, and then maybe that conversation can nurture a relationship. And if we have a relationship, then maybe we could start to talk about some of those tougher things, some of those things where we do defer. So that's what comes to mind.
Sounds good. I have two words: reasoned humility.
Reasoned humility.
Sometimes humility comes off as, oh, I really don't know anything. But your humility is reasoned, in other words, I think we have to have viewpoints. They have to be reasonable. And yet there needs to be a humility that attaches to it. Because many times when we come into conflict with someone who doesn't understand or agree with our view, we take it as an affront and our pride is hurt, especially if we think we've thought about it more than somebody else or that we're an expert or we've read the right news outlets. So we need to have reasons we believe what we believe,
Yeah.
but we need to hold them with humble hands.
So that John Roush would refer to that as epistemic humility. Epistemic humility, another one of my favorite words. We
Yeah,
got eschatological and epistemological.
that's just when academics want to keep us going, ooh, they're smart and I have no idea what it means.
No. You know, come on. You know what epistemological is, right? It's
I
how
do.
like the way that we arrive at conclusions, the
I
way we
know,
think.
but the guy on the street that you said is your neighbor, if you go up to him and talk about epistemological humility or eschatological assurance, he's going to go, look, I just need a quarter for coffee. Okay.
That's my vanity, man. I want to impress some folks with listen, man, I'm not like you. I didn't go to college. I don't have all those fancy degrees, so maybe I'm overcompensating for that for that lack of
Now
formal education.
that's part of your tagline, man.
What
I'm just a common man.
I'm just a
Yeah,
regular guy, Jersey
yeah,
guy.
yeah, right. Exactly. That's why yeah. Not common. What is common? I don't know. I wish there were a few more common people, but a lot of us are all uncommon in
Yeah.
this culture. If you believe that God exists, that he's right, that he's reliable, and that he's real, you're uncommon,
Actually,
unfortunately.
I, this is just the beginning of a thought. It might be foolish and naive, but you just gave me a really great argument for the existence of God. And that is what a miracle the individuality of every single human being that's ever been born and will be born is. How is that possible without God? Right? I don't know. It's the beginning of a thought. If my friend John Roush was here, he's an atheist, an avowed atheist, so he would tell me the foolishness in that. But I don't know. Am I on the right track, you think?
Well, yeah, just ask John, why is there something rather than nothing? Eventually, you have to get back to Plato's or Aristotle's unmoved mover. Something, there's a cause.
Yeah.
So far, science has not been able to agree on what that is.
Well, if you ever get a chance, John has a number of public conversations, and he's actually very dear friends with some guys that I'm sure you know, Russell Moore, who's now the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today,
Yep.
and Pete Wehner, who is one of George W. Bush's head speech
Yeah.
writers,
Yeah.
and both, what I would consider conservative Christians, but their public conversations on faith, in particular, Christianity, is just so again nuanced and deep and
I'd love to leave you with a name and a book.
okay.
Thomas Nagel.
Nagel.
Yeah, it might be
Okay.
L.E. And he wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos. He is the tenured professor of the philosophy of science and law at New York University.
Okay.
And he's written this little book, and basically it says that the theory of materialistic naturalism cannot explain the immaterial, that physical, material, chemical processes cannot produce that which is not material. So, mind and consciousness is this thing that there is a sense in which humanity has a consciousness that can't be explained. And he's an atheist, and he comes to the conclusion that the evolutionary theory of materialistic naturalism cannot possibly be true.
Mm.
Doesn't know how to explain how come there is something rather than nothing, and how come we have the immaterial part of humanity. He can't get there, and he's not sure that he wants to try because, but it's an incredible book. It's very small, but it's
Okay.
very dense. He's gotten in a lot of trouble for it, but he's tenured. So he's out there, and you just wonder how many other guys who have wandered the hallways of always the ever-changing evolutionary pathway have in the back of their hearts and minds come to realize that God has made himself known in us. We are image bearers and we'll never get rid of it.
Hmm.
So anyway,
Okay.
it's interesting.
Well, I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes, so folks can find that as well. It sounds really fascinating.
It is.
I'd love to dive into it myself. So you know my taste well enough to give me a really great recommendation.
Okay.
Before we go, David, how can folks follow you, find more information about grace and just all the great, you're doing so much great work. How can folks follow you?
Yeah, it's interesting when I came here, our website is gracebaptist.org,
It's a great
which
site.
which is amazing because there's a Grace Baptist church in almost every town in
Yeah.
America, but somehow our guys got it first. And you can go there. My sermons are there. A lot of my writing is there. And then all of my books are on Amazon. And just look up David Hegg, Hegg, like a chicken's egg with an H in front of it. And you can see all the books that are available. And yeah. And also you can email me, david.hegg at gracebaptist.org. David.hegg, Hegg, at gracebaptist.org.
I'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well. Um, and we did cover quite a bit, but is there
Oh,
anything important we haven't discussed that you'd like to add before we close?
no, I just think you and I ought to get together every once in a while and just, you know, stay good to our wives, lean into virtue, and try and be useful to God in whatever way we can.
And do a little rabble rousing?
There you go. Yeah,
David, this is awesome, man. I'm so grateful to you for spending the time and sharing your thoughts with our listeners and audience. Really appreciate it, man.
good. Well, I love you, Corey Nathan. I always
Yeah.
will.
I appreciate that. And as
Thank
always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review. Don't forget that. That's really helpful. And now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/at politics and religion. youtube.com/at politics and religion. We're really trying to grow our following there, and just engage, have one more place where folks can engage. I'm also on all the socials. At Corey S. Nathan, at COREYS as in Sam, NATHAN, at Corey S. Nathan, and Substack, all the things. So now you can go talk some politics and religion with gentleness. Actually, okay, so I'm going to say with gentleness and respect. Can you quote the verse? Do you remember where that is, Dave? I'm putting you on the spot.
you. Uh, well, Titus 1 or Titus 3, 1 and 2 talk about or it could be Second Timothy 2, 24 through 26, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition.
The one I'm thinking of is the Apologia verse. Make a ready defense for the hope that's within you, but with gentleness and
Oh,
respect.
yeah. Being ready always to give a defense to those. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
So
Okay.
now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.